Today's episode is sponsored by Quilt Photography Co. Kick bad photography out the door right now. Photos are tricky and they get it, but they'll make them easy for you. You make the quilts and they'll take the photos. Let Quilt Photography Co. make your quilts look awesome, because they are. Visit them at quiltphotography.com. Thank you so much, Quilt Photography Co. And now, here's the show. Welcome to episode 131 of the While She Naps podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Today, we're talking about building a career as a quilter with my guest, Molli Sparkles. Molli Sparkles is a multi-award-winning quilt maker who describes himself as a quilt maker to the stars, fearless leader of the glitterati, and spiller of truth tea. He blogs at mollisparkles.com and is a regular columnist for Make Modern and Textile Fiber Forum magazine. His quilts have been exhibited and sold internationally with a flair for humor, subversion, originality, and self-worth. Molli Sparkles, welcome.
Hey, Abby. It's great to speak to you from the future. How are you doing today?
It's great to speak to you too. And you're in the future because you're in Australia.
I am. I live in Sydney, Australia. I'm originally from America. I'm originally from Oklahoma. But I am living in Sydney now for 13 years. So we're about 16, 17 hours ahead of you, and it's now Wednesday morning here.
That's right. And it's Tuesday evening here. So I'm so glad that we figured out our time zones. I mean, this worked. It was a little complicated. Yeah, exactly. It was a little complicated scheduling, but you totally were like, hey, here's what time it is where you are. Here's the time it is where I am. We're making this work. So I'm so glad to talk to you. And I've been reading your blog for years and years and following your work for a long time. And so just getting to the opportunity to talk to you and hear more about it is really exciting for me. So I guess we'll start with what brought you to Australia, because not that many Americans I know have moved to Sydney. So how did you get there?
Yeah, it was a crazy adventure. I had done a study abroad program when I was at college in Philadelphia, where I went to University of Pennsylvania. And I spent 6 months here, loved it. And then when I finished college, I wanted to come back. So I applied to the University of Sydney to do my Master's of Fine Arts. And they accepted me before any other school did. And so I just jumped at the chance. And I came out. I was supposed to be here a year, but 6 weeks after arriving, I met my lovely fiance, Mr. Sparkles. His name's, as people know him on the blog, his name's Adam, and fell in love. And I've been here for 13 years now, 13 and a half, I guess. And it's just been fantastic. And it really, from the moment I've been here, it's felt like home.
Oh, wow. That's great. And when you were at the University of Pennsylvania, what were you majoring in there?
Yeah, I did fine arts as well. I did photography as a major, and it was pretty much 4 years of me living in a dark room because this was before digital. Digital was just emerging in photography. And so I was a working photographer after that for a few years. And after I sort of went back to school and did my master's, I knew I did photography as well. I didn't really want to continue on that path and be a poor artist for the rest of my life. So I started looking for other jobs and switched industries completely. Now I work for Apple Computers as the National Facilities Manager for Australia. So completely different. But that's why quilting has really supplemented the creative absence in my life that I lost when I sort of stopped doing photography as a career. And now all of the quilting and even the photography that I do at my blog serves as a passion project rather than me needing to be financially fueled and filled by it.
Right. And do you make money through quilting now, or is quilting really not a source of income at all?
Quilting definitely has been a source of income. It has been I'm not paying the mortgage with it, but it definitely funds itself. I have a separate bank account for the quilting money that comes in and comes out, and with my regular writing gigs, there's money transactions through there, and I've sold several quilts and been sponsors for various fabric sewing machine companies, and so I try to keep a cost neutral equation to quilting, but right now it's probably more coming in than going out.
Okay. All right. Good. So that's kind of good to give people kind of a sense of that. So, all right. So you're a transplant to Sydney, but you grew up in the United States. And did you grow up in Oklahoma? Do I have that right?
Yeah, I did. I grew up in a small town called Broken Arrow, and went to Coweta High School in Oklahoma on a remote sort of farmland surrounded by soybean fields, raised by my grandparents. Grandma Sparkles is a regular feature on my blog.
Yeah, you talk about her very fondly.
Yes, she raised me. My grandparents raised me from a small toddler, and they're so important to me and my upbringing and my life today, and the person who I am. And I'm always very complimentary to my grandmother, just because of the character traits she's instilled in me, and my love of quilting is directly related to her. She was a quilter, or still is a quilter, and I remember rummaging through her fabric stash and helping lay out her quilt designs on the carpet in the living room floor. I guess that was precursor to what we use a design wall for. This is the design room floor, and there were applique hearts everywhere, and 9 patches, and big puffy polyester batting. And she used her kitchen table as the sewing room. So it's all very familiar. This was back in the late 80s and early 90s, and to what we use today. So I have those vivid memories. I never, I guess, appreciated them at the time, nor helped her sew with anything. I'm completely self-taught, but that memory of just assisting her and being around all of the quilt items definitely sparked an interest later on.
And so did she make other things besides quilts? Like, did she sew clothes and sew things for the house?
No, really. It was really just a quilting, and it was a social aspect for her. Some of the neighbor ladies sort of, were out in the country, so there aren't a lot of people. It was about 20 minutes to go get petrol or gasoline to the nearest little town. And it was really social for her. So the neighbors, who lived 10 minutes, 15 minutes away, taught her how to quilt, and then so she started doing it, and they'd have little quilt get-togethers and sewing alongs and stuff, much like we do on the internet now. And so it was really just that social aspect for her, and I would just follow along, and I would just meet all of these little interesting people that were making things with their hands. And I just remember thinking that all of the colors of the fabric and such were sort of magical. And then you would come out, and there would be an actual item that you could use, and but it was only ever to quilts, no clothing or anything.
Okay, all right. And then what did they do for work? I mean, were they farming or?
No, so it was an interesting situation. My grandmother was a stay-at-home grandmother, a stay-at-home mom for me, and was very active in my upbringing in school, like at the parent-teacher organization president, and volunteering at school. The area that we lived was owned by the city, Broken Arrow, and my grandfather was the water treatment plant supervisor for the city of Broken Arrow, and so we lived on the land where the water treatment plant was. So we were surrounded by, it was just like, there's the building where the water treatment plant is, but then there's all these lakes, and it was and lakes and then fields all around our house. So we were very solitary, but there was a lot of room for me to explore and go fishing or hunting or, do all of those outdoorsy things that you would do in Oklahoma. Of course, all I ever wanted to do was live in the city. So it was completely lost on me. And I actually hated and was very resentful that I was of all people, had to live out in the middle of nowhere. And all my friends at school were living in neighborhoods with cul-de-sacs and were riding bikes through the streets. and I was out stuck alone playing with fabric. Now I think it probably was nothing that could be better.
Right, right. I see. Okay. But you were obviously really artistic because you went, and also you must have been quite a good student because you went to, I mean, University of Pennsylvania is an Ivy League college and you were an art major. So there must have been a story there because you must have been a high achiever of some kind. Like, you must have done pretty well.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I was. I mean, I don't mean to, and I don't want to sound arrogant or egotistical. But yeah, I was definitely a high achiever, overachiever in a lot of cases. I was valedictorian and of my high school, which sounds so far away now, thinking back about it. But I was that kid in school that would take every advanced class just to take it, just to cure my natural taste for education. Loved hanging out at school, loved hanging out with my teachers, was inspired by them and who they were to be. I remember being in second grade and wanting to go to Harvard University. That was my goal in life at the time. And then when I applied and got into the University of Pennsylvania, I went to visit. I loved Philadelphia. I loved the Quadrangle, which is the major schooling grounds, and just had the best time there. And it was some of the best 4 years. Well, some of the best time of my life. I was there in school for 4 years and then lived there another year afterwards, working. And it still is a beautiful place, and I would recommend anyone to go there. But the art program really changed my life in a way that I didn't expect. I didn't expect going into the University of Pennsylvania that I would be an artist. You know, I had obviously I had to have certain grades and test scores, et cetera, to get into an Ivy League school. And art was very far from my mind, actually, you know, going into the university. And once I started meeting my tribe of fellow artists, I quickly realized I wanted to be one of them. And again, I had never touched photography. I studied photography. I had never picked up a camera before going to the university. And once I did so, I just fell in love with it. And I fell in love with that darkroom processing, and even in a color darkroom, which is a dry process, color balancing. I'd always had a very good eye for color at high school. And once I was in the darkroom, I could see colors. And with a color darkroom, you are using a scale called CMYK, which is cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And you're balancing at one dial at a time to get the exact correct balance. Everyone does this on their phone now using warmth and cool tones of a slider.
Right.
But before we did it in a dark room. And so my color sense became really astute, and that really carried it forward into quilting, because I can look at colors and really differentiate between value and tone and shade and brightness just from fabrics, just looking at them without any need for turning things black and white or doing a lot of thinking about it. I can just really click and see what works.
Yeah. And that's actually incredibly important for creating a good composition in quilting. And it's more important than people realize when you're selecting fabrics. It's much more important than just selecting pretty fabrics. That when you're pulling fabric for quilting, I mean, that's what really makes a quilt shine. So yeah, I can see how that would transfer forward. Okay. So you went to the University of Pennsylvania, which is very, very urban and very different from where you grew up, and opened your eyes to this world of art. Okay, and then, but you still weren't quilting at all. I mean, quilting was not part, and sewing. You know, I'm assuming you really didn't know how to sew. That really wasn't part of your worldview at all.
No, not at all. And I have to say, I didn't even. It sounds awful, but I felt a sense of what we would call in Australia dagginess about quilting and sewing. And what's the best way to explain dagginess? Something that's just sort of not sophisticated. And I remember thinking about my grandmother and what she was making. And I was just like, oh, that's sort of kind of just little, not uncouth, but just a little less, not fine art, and very crafty. Mm-hmm. And I at the time I would have used the word crafty in a negative connotation.
Yeah.
And now, I scold myself and slap my hand, and I can look back at the error of my ways and say, wow, crafty and I actually did learn this at university when I was taking fine art courses, like craft has a whole imbibed meaning and a whole history of fine art behind it that people are not even aware of when they use the word craft or crafty, but it's imbibed with such meaning and historical context that people really should explore that. And if they have an interest in craft versus fine art, there's so much to discuss. But for me, it wasn't until I was already in Australia and was getting bored and was looking for something to do that I picked up a needle and thread.
Right. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about that process, because you often talk about or tell the story of sort of wanting to make something with your grandmother, and kind of returning home to Oklahoma and asking her to show you.
Yeah.
So is that really the origin story, or how did you really learn how to sew?
Yeah. Okay. So there's two parts to this story. Okay. So I love this story because it really captures for me exactly what I wanted it to be when it was happening, and I can look back at it now, and it is perfectly wrapped up in a bow of how I wanted it to occur. So what happened is I went home for just a family trip to see my grandparents in Oklahoma from Australia, and I was there, I think, for 6 days. And on the first day, I said to my grandmother, who is quite young for a grandmother. At the time, she was probably about late 60s. Right now, she's I think she just turned 72.
Okay, so she's actually younger than my mom. Yeah.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
So I'm 37. My grandmother, my grandmother is 72. Yeah.
Okay.
And so it's just a very shallow generations. I said to her on day one, hey, Grandma, I want to make a quilt together so that we can have a shared memory of doing it together, so that when, eventually you do die, or as everyone does, I have this sort of tangible object that we created together, and it becomes this heirloom for me and my life. And she kind of just looked at me crazily and wide-eyed. I was like, you're only here for 6 days. And I was like, well, that's okay. We can do it. And she's like, do you know how to sew? No. Do you know how to do it? No. I literally had no idea what was involved and nothing about quilting. I was just like rocking up on our doorstep saying, let's make a quilt. And so I designed this pattern that I knew in my head what I wanted it to be. And I ended up calling it Trip Around the Universe. And it's very similar to a trip around the world, except the fabrics don't repeat. And so it's an ombre. It's on my bed now, actually. It's an ombre from white to dark blue, going through a blue value spectrum. And I had a pattern on the graph paper. I drafted it. And so we spent those 6 days going to the fabric store, selecting 44 different fabrics to go in the quilt. And then I was like, I'm not going to sew. I was a diva even then. I said, I'm not going to sew. You have to do all the sewing, but I'll do like the cutting and the ironing, whatever else needs to be done. So in that 6 days, we finished the quilt top itself. And then about 6 months later, I think she sent it to me in the mail, and it had been quilted, and she got a backing for it and bound it. And her friend Judy has a long arm machine. And so they long armed it together and sent it to me. And it's fantastic. And it's a queen size quilt. I love it, 90 inches square. And it's one of my favorites. So I consider that my precursor quilt, like the pre-quilt, because I actually didn't sew any of it.
Right.
But I had a contributing factor. And then what happened is I got home, and like there was this like niggling, like I had touched fabric, and I was like, actually that wasn't so bad. That was kind of cool. Like I don't know how to sew, but those colors are pretty. That was exciting. And so I said, I bet I can figure this out. It's just squares, right? And so I started watching YouTube videos, and I thought, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy some fabric, and then I'm going to make a quilt for my grandmother and not tell her, right? And so that it would be a surprise, and I'd be like, I've taught myself how to sew. And then I said, once I started this idea, I said, I'll start keeping like an online journal with like pictures so that I can send to her with the quilt to say, oh, here's my journey as I learned how to make a quilt and sew, and in order to give it to you as a thank you for being like the most awesome and fantastic person in my life. And it all started just because I wanted to give my grandmother a big hug and a big thank you. And so I went about making this quilt for her, and I would call her and say, hey, I'm making a quilt for my best friend, Lacey, from high school. And I said, what would you do if you had to do it like this? And I just kept asking my grandmother advice on how to quilt all the time, telling her it was for someone else. Meanwhile, I figured out I had bought way too much fabric. And so concurrently, I started making a second quilt, like on day 2, while I was making the first one, to give to my friend Lacey. And I told my friend Lacey that I was making a quilt for my grandmother. Meanwhile, I was making quilts for each of them and talking to each of them about the other person's quilt. And so at the end of it all, I got them both finished, and I had started blogging about my experience. It was September 12th, I think I started blogging in 2012, somewhere around that day. No, September 7th, I think. And I quickly realized that me being, the ego-driven person at the time that I was, I thought, oh, no one has a quilt blog. Who would ever have done that? I'll start a quilt blog and be the first person in the world. And then I started it and realized there were like 20,000 quilt blogs out there. And I obviously had not been so original, but I kept going, and I gave my quilt to my grandmother and gave the other quilt to my friend Lacey, and kept blogging about them. And they were over the moon and excited. And I had committed the cardinal sin of quilting, which is starting another project before you finish the first, without even realizing that was a very commonality amongst all quilters.
I want to take a minute now and talk with our sponsor, Quilt Photography Co., and the founder of Quilt Photography Co., Amy Garrow.
My name is Amy Garrow, and I own Quilt Photography Co. A while ago, when I was blogging and starting to write patterns, I would go outside and try to take photos and try to get my husband to hold them. And I mean, that went okay. And they're blowing everywhere, and lighting was always an issue. But recently I opened a portrait studio. And so now what I do is I get to use all my really fancy equipment to take photos that are perfect of quilts. And it's a really exciting collision of those two worlds of the photography and the quilts. And so I decided that I wanted to offer that passion to everybody else. So what it is you just drop your quilt in the mail, and then I take it to a studio with white gloves, and it gets the full-on model treatment, and you get professional, extremely high-quality photos, and then I send it right back to you, and you didn't have to lift a finger, and you have these amazing photos. So I'm taking extremely modern shots of the quilts that you're not going to be able to get on your own. So the most important one is the full flat shot, and I can accommodate any quilt size. So if you have an extra large king, that's not a problem. And that's on a white background. And then I also take folded shots, drape shots, hanging shots, also on a white background. And what that's fabulous for is if you're inserting text around it or using it for any other form of design, you just drop it into your pattern. And if the only reason you want photos is because you love your quilt, then that's what they're for too. But they're also great for submitting to quilt shows, because you always need at least one flat shot and one detail shot. And those can be hard to get, and you don't want your quilt to not get into the quilt show because your photography didn't show how beautiful the quilt was. So the flat shot is, obviously the most important, and then we do the other cool ones out from there. So the whole point is for it to be very easy for you and very convenient, and then it's also pretty affordable. So one flat shot is $125, and then it goes up from there. And when you think about it in relationship to the amount of time that you're spending trying to take your own photos, it's such a time saver that it's so worth it. And one thing too is that you have full usage rights. So sometimes people ask me like, well, can I use it though? And I say, yes, absolutely. You can use it for commercial purposes. You can put it in a book. You can submit it to a magazine, anything you need to. That's what I'm here for. So it's really easy. It's just quiltphotography.com. For all of your listeners, which I'm an avid listener, so I'm excited about this because I love the coupon codes. Just type in "while she naps" into your checkout, and that'll give you half off your first order. And that there's no limit on the number of quilts you put in there. So if you want to put in 5 quilts and get half off your full order, go for it.
Oh, that's such a great deal. Thank you so much, Amy. This is awesome. Thank you so much, Quilt Photography Co. And now back to my conversation with Molli. Did you learn to sew just from like videos?
Yeah. Videos, trial and error. No, I never had any classes or anything. Like I literally went out to IKEA and bought a sewing machine for
I
$70.
love the IKEA sewing machine. I teach sewing, people to use their sewing machines locally, and I love it when people bring in the yellow and blue IKEA sewing machine. It's so cute.
I named her Betsy. She is adorable. I think it's called the SY sewing machine. And yeah, it was great. It was like a way for me to spend $70 and not invest a lot of money and that's 70 Australian, so probably like 50 in the US.
It's cheap and it works.
And it works. And granted, I did go through 3 of them. I'm making my first quilt. I kid you not. I took it back 3 times. I'm like, this one is neat. I need a new one.
It's broken.
They kept giving me a new one. And so after I made those first 2 quilts, I was like, okay, this is going to stick. And and those first 2 quilts were squares and half square triangles. And I started reading other blogs, and there's a lot of tutorials on blogs at that time. And I started making quilty friends and getting involved in Facebook groups that were quilt centric, and talking to people, and they would point me in directions, and I was, fake it until you make it. Really, it's just wing it the whole time. And I've never stopped believing that, hey, it's just fabric.
Right.
It can be unstitched, it can be recut, it can be repurposed. So I've never been so really that precious about it. And so I just had fun. And I think that the more we do that as creators and allow ourselves to have fun and play and forgive the mistakes, the more creative that we do become.
Right. Absolutely. You have to sort of just not be afraid to fail and never feel like it's a waste of time or a waste of money or whatever, and waste of energy. It was a learning experience. And so,
everything leads us to somewhere else.
Absolutely. Yeah, I firmly believe that. So, and so the quilting became one piece of this, but then the blog became another piece of it. Cause I kind of feel like both of them have had a pretty major influence out into the world. So I want to kind of talk about the blog a little bit. So, it's funny that you thought like your blog, like there were no other quilting blogs, no one's thought of this, which is kind of funny, but maybe it's sometimes a good place to come from, like a place of naivete, just because you're not, feeling, sort of overwhelmed by all the amazing,
or bound by any rules.
Exactly. It's sort of better in some ways to come at it
totally.
from that worldview. But, so what did the blog have a name in the beginning?
Yeah, so I had this is also a frequent story that I've told on my blog as well, but I had a nickname already of Molli Sparkles at work, at my day job, and that I had sort of received innocently via a Miley Cyrus song, and people can read about it on the blog. It was too long of a story to discuss at the moment.
Well, tell us the brief version of it.
Okay, so I had went on a work trip, had a song stuck in my head. My work colleague was tired of me humming it on a 14-hour flight, sitting next to her. And we got there and she's like, okay, we're going to sit down and figure this out. The song turned out to be Miley Cyrus's Party in the USA. And because my friend is a New Zealander, we call them Kiwi, and they have a very thick accent, or she did. And so when she said, when I said it was Miley Cyrus, she said, I'm going to start calling you Miley, but it came out Molly because it heard the way that they pronounced the I was sort of like a U, like Molly. And so she's like, I'm going to call you Molly. And I was wearing Converse shoes with sparkle, like sequins all over them at the time. And she's like, I'm going to call you Molli Sparkles. And so the name just stuck. And so then everyone at work started calling me Molli Sparkles. And this was before I had started quilting. And I just thought, actually, that's kind of a clever name. So I'm just going to buy the website domain. This is before quilting at all. I had no idea what I was going to do with it, but I was like, it costs $13. I'm going to go buy that. Yeah. And I bought it. And then when I started quilting and then I was like doing the blog, I was like, actually, hello, that's perfect. And I like the name as it's Molli Sparkles, but I also like that it is a verb as well, like Molly sparkles down the street. So I just have always been really, for I guess like 7 years, I've had that nickname. Really affected by it. And just when I started quilting, I was like, that's perfect. And I started the blog. It was an obvious choice. And yeah, that's where it all began.
Okay. So to what degree do people in your real life really call you Molli Sparkles?
So if anywhere in the quilting world, I will only respond to Molly. Because it's sort of like, I almost call it like quilt drag, because
I love that. That's great.
When I'm in that zone, so if I'm at a trade show, that's just where my head's at. My real name is Joshua. So, right.
Your given name is Joshua Helms.
Given name is Joshua Helms. Yeah. But I'm walking down the street, at QuiltCon. I remember I was approached outside of QuiltCon by some glitterati, and I was just, if they would have said Joshua, I wouldn't have turned around, because that's not where my head's at. So in my quilt zone, it's Molly only. In my day-to-day life, people call me Joshua, but my friends call me Molly as well. The name, due to the popularity and people coming to my house and seeing my studio and knowing that this is not just a passing fad or this is a passion, that Molly is here to stay.
Right. Like you were on, was it like the Today Show?
Yeah. I was on the Today Show. It's the same Today Show that you have in the United States, but it's the Australian version, promoting my feature as the guest artist at the Sydney Craft and Quilt Fair, and the show and my quilts. And yeah, I was with Carl Stefanovic and Lisa Wilkinson, and they referred to me as Molly, and it comes across on the screen as Molly. So I'm very happy to be known as Molli Sparkles. It's very fitting, and it's fitting for my day-to-day personality as well.
Right. Yeah. So that's really great. I think thanks for clarifying that, because like in our emails back and forth, you always sign, the email M or Molly. And I wrote to you, hi, Molly, would you like to be a guest on my podcast? And, and I knew that your given name was Joshua. So it was sort of like, does he want to be referred to this way? I think he does. And,
totally.
Yeah. So that's good. It. Yeah. Great. I mean, I figured you did. So that's good to know. So, because that's how you were signing your name. So I figured that was what you wanted. Okay. But it kind of gets to your blog, which I think, unlike, I would say most quilting blogs, although not all, I mean, there's a few out there that are this way, but yours definitely, I would say stands out, by sort of taking a stab at subverting gender norms. That's something that you kind of come out in front of. And, you've got this sort of female pseudonym, which you're totally taking on. Your logo is pink and sparkly. You sometimes refer to yourself as a he or a she. I'm not sure. Yeah. You're just sort of pushing those gender boundaries. There's, your photo is got glitter coming down from your eye. And so I just wondered whether, do you feel like there's some mission involved there? Do you feel like there's a way in which pushing those boundaries in a very public way, it's definitely unusual among quilting blogs and quilters? I would say, at least in the United States, tend to trend conservative.
Yeah.
And I mean, not all of them, obviously, not all of any group of people, but
Exactly.
that's,
Yeah. I get you.
Yeah, there's a tendency.
Yeah.
So I just wondered whether you feel like there's, I don't know, like a way of helping to expand people's mindset.
So I will, that's such a loaded question. There's so much there and I love it. So first of all, everything on my blog is nuanced, considered, and purposeful. So there's nothing left to chance or accidental about the articles I write, the color of things, the pictures I post. It takes me a really quite a lengthy process just to even write, a 500-word blog post, because my attention to detail and the words I choose to use are very intentional and purposeful. And so when we just start talking about subverting gender norms, absolutely. When Molli Sparkles came along, I thought, oh, that's brilliant, because it is when the nickname and leading to the blog name. Because for me, it was exactly what I wanted it to be. Like, I want people to come to the blog expecting one thing and maybe getting something else unexpected, but then being okay with it. And I used to do that a lot in my photography as well. And the photography that I would do at university was often male nudes, and I would do them covered in paint or food product or some sort of masking so that you couldn't necessarily see the male genitalia until you really looked closely. And what I really loved about that was because it was so subversive, and the idea that people would approach, and especially I always use my grandmother as a typical case study, and she would approach and be like, "Oh, that's really beautiful. And I like the red and it's gorgeous color and shapes and lines." And then you start staring a little bit longer and you go, "Oh, there's a penis. Ooh." And then people go, "Oh," and then there's a little bit of that shock and awe, but then does it make you reflect and go, actually, I still like it, even though it is a penis? Is that okay? Should I not like it? And then it starts like creating all these questions. And that's exactly the same process that I'm trying to achieve with my blog. And, there are lots of people that come to my blog and know full well that I am a man quilting, and Molly is just a pseudonym, or nom de quilt, as someone once put it.
I love that too. Okay.
Nom de quilt, yeah. And then there are other people that message me on Facebook, or I see like passive messages to other people talking about me as a female, or using feminine gendered pronouns. And I think that's also great, because I have, like, while I self-identify as a man, as a gender, I don't feel that if I were to self-identify as a woman gender, that there would be anything wrong with that. And I think, why not? I don't harbor any resentment about someone coming to my blog and expecting or calling me female, because I think, wow, women are great. Like, I honestly think women are great. So it's almost a compliment, really. I mean, it is a compliment either way. Like, it's so irrelevant to me, whether people think Molli Sparkles is a man or a woman, that I try to keep it in that shades of pink area. That Molly is who you want him or her to be.
But it's so neat that your blog, in that way that your photographs were, your blog is a project that way. In other words, you know what I mean? Like, you were talking about your photos as something that you see at first glance and think are beautiful. Then you look more carefully and it sort of becomes problematic. And then you start to say to yourself, but if I thought it was beautiful and now I think it's problematic, what do I think next? And, but your whole blog is that. Do you know what I mean? So it's like almost like your whole blog is that project.
Yeah, exactly. And I love, and that for me has been the passion about it, is making it a very nuanced character in Molli Sparkles. And I want people to be able to dig deep into not only Molly, but the work itself. And, some of my work, I'll admit, is rubbish. And there are projects that I go, oh, what was I thinking? And then there are other projects that I go, actually, I still really love that years later, or that has a greater subversion to it that is really reflected in from the blog, and one thing will lead to another. And I just hope that people are able to see the work outside of any of the drama or histrionics that come sometimes with the blog and the comments and the likes and stuff, because sometimes the work can get lost amongst all of that.
Yeah. And there's been some drama.
There has been some drama on the blog.
Yeah, there's been some drama. And I like that you're not afraid to sort of, put your toe into the drama and sort of see where things go. So we'll talk about a couple of the projects that within the blog that have led to some of that drama. Because there have been a few that have sort of stood out. So maybe, do you want to talk about like the Gender Kisses project?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So tell us the story there and what happened. I remember following this really closely as it was unfolding.
This has been, okay, so I have to say, so I've been quilting for 6 years, I think. 2012. So yeah, just a little over 6 years, and blogging for about that same time. There are a lot of stories, and many of them dramatic, and some of them I may not recapture as eloquently now as at the time, because it's a kind of a blur. It's like those photo albums that you need to revisit and go, oh my God, what was I wearing? So with Gender Kisses, though, there was this whole sort of Luke Haynes, I think he had a podcast. Was he on your podcast?
He was on my podcast, but I'm not even sure that the comment was there. I'm not sure if it was there or elsewhere. I don't remember.
It might have been before.
It could have been.
This is the long story of it short story of it was that there were some ladies who I love dearly now after we've discussed and hashed it all out, both named Stephanie. And there was some comments made about the Luke Haynes podcast, and I got on my blog and I was like, well, I don't really agree with this, and in no certain terms sort of let it rip about what I thought of the situation, which was actually in retrospect, and as we discussed it, quite in line with sort of the comments that Stephanie had made, and we were much more similar, I think, than dissimilar. We were just coming at it from different directions. And so we started really engaging this dialogue, and this blog post that I had written created a field of commentary, both on her blog and my blog, about the role of men in quilting, and I think if I remember correctly, but the quote on my blog was, his dick may have got him in the door, but his talent kept it wedged open, or something like that.
Something
that I had
like
written.
that, right? So you're sort of basically saying that just because you're a male, sort of, does that make you sort of more recognized in the quilting industry or something like that? Yeah.
Exactly. And my viewpoint of it was, hey, use what your mama gave you. And my mother always wore red lipstick and a push-up bra. And she was not ashamed of it and taught me not to be ashamed of it either. And so I always just thought, I have certain skills that certain people have, and they have skills that I don't have, and at the time, if someone, with English paper piecing, I had, or hand sewing, I had none of those skills. So people can use those skills to advance their whatever career or talents or sponsorship deals, whatever they got. But if I've only got a personality and I'm relying on my gender, I have no problem using that to open opportunities for myself. However, I cannot rely on that singular attribute to continue my success, or any success that were to happen because of it, because it really will rely on the talent and skills. And that's a very moralistic and optimistic view of the world, I think, coming from me, but that's how I see things as well. So I wanted to really express that Stephanie, who I participated in with this Gender Kisses challenge with, wanted to have that conversation and dialogue. And so we started talking, and we decided that we wanted to have a quilt off, for lack of a better word, where we would both take, we decided on a preset pattern, a pattern block to use, and gave ourselves a little bit of parameters around the size of a quilt and whether we're using solids or prints or whatever. Said, okay, we're going to give each other 30 days and we're going to both make a quilt, and then we'll have people vote to see who made it, whether it was quilt A was the man quilt or quilt B was the woman quilt, and see what happens. See if you can actually identify in our little micro case study who's is who. And it turned out that 40% of the people, guess about that, said that the quilt I made was made by a woman, and 60% of the people said that my quilt was made by a man. And interesting, my quilt was pastel blue and pastel pink, and her quilt was very strong contrast with lots of jewel tones and very grounded, where mine was a little more airy and fairy. So, it was a really interesting dialogue that happened on the blog because of it. That was probably the second time in my career that I was sent hateful comments. And that really actually hurt me at the time. I remember being very affected by the way people were talking about me, outside of, like, they weren't talking with me. They were talking about me. And really
that's really hard. Yeah. I've had that happen to me several times, and it's very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially when, like, I'm not a, quote unquote celebrity. And it was something I never experienced or expected. And so that has always, it toughens you up. Now I'm just like, whatever, but I'm also now I'll serve it back because I have no respect, time, energy, land for trolls. And especially if you come into my house, which is my blog, and try to pass off that behavior as acceptable, I will shut it down really quickly because I really believe that kindness can change the world, and we need to hold people accountable to those standards.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you for talking a little bit about that one. So that was one.
Yeah.
That was one really controversial sort of situation. And I think it's still a conversation that people are having, around,
Sure.
Exactly, around gender sort of in the industry and what happens there. And then you've really been a leader around, with a post on So Mama So and posts with Sam Hunter around sort of the value of quilts and not undervaluing them when it comes to selling your work. And sort of the We Are So Worth It series and that sort of thing. And, I think you made a quilt called No Value Does Not Equal Free, which is a quilt that, it appears to be like all white.
Yeah. So again, playing on words and the subversion. So, of the value, when we talk about value, the range from light to dark. And so I made this quilt that was all white with the idea that, well, it is actually valueless because it's white. But then it's not valueless, and it certainly doesn't equal free, because what I did with that quilt is put a stopwatch basically on every minute and second that I was working on the quilt to really define how much time went into my labor for that quilt. And then I costed the entire quilt from fabric, design fees, materials, created a spreadsheet, posted it on the blog, let people comment on it and download the spreadsheet themselves if they wanted to use it. Figured out that quilt, which I think was about 64 inches square, and using a trip around the world block, very simple squares, as a Bonnie Hunter tutorial, very, very simple. And it was about $3,000, depending on which US or AUD dollar value. And I ended up selling it after it won several awards here in Australia and the United States, and ended up selling it for its actual value that I had costed. However, getting to that stage of finally selling it was arduous. There were many people who thought I was ridiculous in even asking for $20 an hour for my time. And I'd actually have since revised that to $30 an hour. But at the time, people were like, well, I only asked $10. I don't charge any labor for my time. I don't think we should. It's my hobby. I just do it to keep my fabric purchases, free. And it felt really disingenuous of me not to pipe up and say something, as a person who believes that everyone has the right and should demand self-respect for themselves. And self-respect comes for demanding what you're worth in both your personal relationships, but in business relationships as well. And so I wrote this blog post, and after reading about Sam Hunter's "We Are So Worth It" movement, and I contacted her and just thought it was the bee's knees about what she was doing, and wanted to take it a step further and contribute what I could. And at the end of the day, I think we've all come, and more and more people are seeing the value of quilting and valuing their work in a way that is appropriate to their region or their skill level. And I hope I've contributed to that conversation. But there's a lot of people doing the same thing, and even the comment section on that blog post and the several recurring blog posts afterwards are a land of great insight into what people are doing around the world. And granted, that was 2013, 2014. So there are, things have changed in that 4 to 5 years, and the internet has changed that in a lot of ways. But it's really interesting to see people's thought processes about what they're worth, and then touching base with those people years later and having similar conversations and seeing if they have changed. In a lot of cases, they have.
Yeah. Right, exactly. But if you don't start the conversation and sort of get people's initial ideas out on the table, it's hard to move forward. Like I'm trained as a teacher, and one of the things that you do in ed school is you learn about how important it is to, when you begin a new unit, for example, is to get all of the students to sort of say what they think they know about a particular topic, and get all that information out on the table before you begin, because you can't scaffold new information on top of it until you sort of know, you have to know what everybody thinks they know first. Because if you sort of start to pile new information on top of a shaky foundation, then you're never going to, if you think about that, that's never going to work. Because you're building building a new framework on something that doesn't actually make sense. And so in order to sort of move forward in a conversation like that, you have to sort of get people's initial ideas about the topic out onto the table. And so starting that conversation several years ago and then checking back in to say, well, has your thinking about this moved at all is really important. Revisiting that topic to say, like, where are we now as a community? Have we progressed, or have we changed our mind as we've continued to talk about this? So I give you guys a lot of credit for doing that.
Thanks. Well, I hope it continues to do so for sure.
Yeah. Okay. And then one other, there's been other ones, but one of them that stands out for sure is you made this specific quilt block, that you named "Don't Be a Dick." And it's a quilt block of a dick. And it caused some controversy, interestingly. You put it on Craftsy, and there was sort of like a lot of people who loved it and thought it was like either hilarious or just wonderful or, fantastic. You made a whole, I think it was a mini quilt maybe. And they were all different colors. And some people thought that was just like awesome and amazing. And then there were people who, thought it was like X-rated and was like awful and pornographic and scandalous and like not for work and not for children and not for families, and were really offended and angry about it, and just were really upset. So I don't know what you felt like you came away from that experience with, or I don't know.
I came away with it that there needs to be more of it.
Okay, so talk a little bit about the whole situation.
Yeah, I mean, that quilt block is just everything to me. Like, it just says so much about my readership and the quilt, the quilt world, I think, and what my role and how I need to bust some of those ideals open even more. And it really excited me to see people react in that way, because this was one of those instances where I just wanted to create something from my sketchbook, and I thought it was kind of innocent. Like, I had just drawn this in my sketchbook, a doodle, and I thought, oh, I wonder if I can figure out how to make this as out of fabric. And the original mini quilt I made was actually as a comment on the tragedy of the occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in Oregon. And that was back in a few years ago. And I had sent it to the occupiers as a protest of like, how dare you like steal this wildlife refuge as your way of protest. And then it all got blown up, and as you recap the story, some people hated it, some people loved it. I loved it because it says a lot about Molli Sparkles, unafraid to, put stuff out there that might turn people's heads. I actually have that quilt on my couch right now. I was bundled up with it this morning. I think it's hilarious. There are more dicks to come. Don't worry. There's definitely a multicolored dick in the works. And I think it's just something that we need to be able to laugh at ourselves a little bit more. The penis for me is not a bad thing. Like, 50% or 49% of the world has one. It's a part of our body, like an elbow. So I don't know why people are so like ashamed of looking at a penis or having a penis. And there's nothing pornographic about a penis. A penis is not necessarily a sexual, doesn't have to be sexualized. So it's weird for me that people were like, oh my God, this is pornographic. And I'm like, it's some squares and some half square triangles, like maybe 2 half rectangles. Like, so it was just like a weird experience in that regard. But I can see now afterwards that, the more I'm able to throw that type of work into the quilt canon, hopefully that will, make people respect it a bit more, find more humor in it, and be less, have less pearl clutching moments by it.
Was it like censored on Craftsy? Am I remembering?
Yeah. Okay. So it was, you were right. So it was censored on Craftsy, because a woman had sent me a comment saying, something about the children and what's next, a pretty little pussy, pattern. And I was like, I think your comment is actually more vulgar than my whole pattern. But anyway, so Craftsy actually were super nice about it. They sent me an email just saying, hey, we actually love your pattern. We think it's hilarious, but we don't have the bandwidth to actually field the emails and the comments and stuff. So can you put just something on the front cover to tone it down? And so me being, subversive Molly, went and took one of those, this sounds probably worse than it is, but if you have ever seen like magazines, like Penthouse magazines at the 7-Eleven or Japanese anime, there's often like starbursts over the nipples of females or over the male or female genitalia. And so I thought that's actually really brilliant. So I took the pattern cover page, which is the large penis block, and just put this starburst over the tip of the penis, and with a little caption that just says "too hot to handle." And so you don't actually see the head of the penis, but you see everything else. And I submitted it back to Craftsy, and they were okay with it, and it still lives up on the Craftsy site. And you can buy my block for $4 and make your own penis cushion or penis quilt. And
I've got to wonder, like, okay, so did that like tamp down the number of emails?
It did. Apparently that was okay. And I was like, that's fantastic. Like, I'm censoring myself, but I'm also making it even more obscene in this weird way, because now it's like,
right,
it actually looks pornographic.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like, I've got to, like, if the number of emails was high before, to me, that would make it higher. But
exactly. People would look at it and go, oh my God, I'm looking at porn. But no, like, that's okay. And then that just feeds back into this subversion of, oh, I was looking at it. Now I'm okay with it. Am I okay with it? No, I'm not okay. Oh, I am. Oh, it's pretty. And all these questions, and people start, really having to question their own motives about what they're doing and saying. And it just fed back into that whole story and dialogue of what I am trying to do with Molli Sparkles. And it makes me want to do more and create different penis blocks for everyone, and big ones and small ones and sideways ones. So we'll see. More to come in that. More to come with penises.
Okay, great. Thank you for telling us all of those. And, these are like the sub projects, with Molli Sparkles being the overarching project. And I think that's fascinating. And they're, sort of endless sub projects, could sprout from this, which is really, really cool. So I want to make sure we get to your recommendations, because you've got a couple of good ones. Okay, the first one, and you were talking before about not having English paper piecing skills yet a couple years back, but it sounds like maybe now you've dived in because you want to recommend English paper piecing, which recovering from a back injury has been great.
Yeah, I've written about it on my blog. My blog is in a little bit of a hiatus at the moment because I did have back surgery several weeks ago, and my partner, Mr. Sparkles, has had a shoulder surgery like a week ago. And so I've been having in and out of hospitals and not being able to sit down or sit at the sewing machine. And, to fuel that creative fire, I needed something else to do. And so I picked up English paper piecing as a way just to keep my hands busy while I'm sitting in the hospital or being at home here, walking around the kitchen. And it is fantastic. I'm not sure that it will fuel my creative needs once I'm like driving the sewing machine again. I have a Juki TL98, so it's like 1,800 stitches per minute or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like goes. So it's a very slow stitching. I'm still processing how I feel about slow stitching, but I do love the experience and being able to expand my creative repertoire at the moment.
Yeah. I know. I feel the same way about English paper piecing. You summed it up well.
Thanks.
Okay. So you wanted to recommend block lock rulers. I actually don't have a block lock ruler. So tell me why they're superior.
Okay, so this changed everything for me in my quilt notion world. I'm not a gadget guy. I'm not a ruler guy. I generally use one ruler. I have my cutting board. I have my rotary blade. That is about it in Molli Sparkles land. When it starts coming to the gadgets, I get kind of like, it only does one thing, and I throw it away. But the block lock rulers, and not only the family grade, I have met them numerous times, and they're hilarious. But the products really do what they're meant to do, and they do them for things that we use all the time. So half square triangles was my first block lock ruler. I think I got it in the 4.5 inch version and the 2.5 inch version. And I used those two rulers in nearly probably every quilt that I have made. And it just really has provided accurate trimming and accurate half square triangles. You can always, for that particular triangle, it has a channel guide where the seam allowance goes into, so everything just stays in place. It has a really great breadth of different sizes that you can use. And then there's a whole bunch of other shapes, and I think I have like 20 different block lock rulers now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the half rectangle triangle ruler is probably makes the most complicated task the easiest one. And so I also recommend that one as well. I'm a big fan of the whole range.
Okay. All right. Wow. Yeah,
They didn't pay me to say that either. They did not pay me to say that. I just love them so much.
Okay. Yeah. That sounds like a really good endorsement. Okay. And then you also wanted to recommend using your design wall for doing improv.
Yeah, and this kind of feeds back into my current state of being injured as well. I haven't been able to sit down at my sewing machine for long periods of time, so I can't do like chain piecing and lots of, if we were just using squares, it'd be involving lots of chain piecing. So I've started working more on improv, and I have a big gridded design wall using Kaif's gray and white gridded flannel.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, and it was big. So I was like, we're talking probably 3 meters square. And so I just throw fabric at it, and I take fat quarters, fat 16s, things from my scrap bin. And I just start putting them on the wall, placing, peeling off. And I don't bother about cutting or anything. It's just large chunks of fabric. And then I just sort of move things around, and occasionally I'll cut things, occasionally I'll sew things together. But for me right now, it's just like practicing my eye. And that is just keeping, while I'm not able to really physically do a lot of heavy lifting with quilting, I can still keep my mind and artistic eye sharp by playing with color and playing with fabric and seeing how they work together.
Yeah, it's almost right, like a play space. And Keith makes this. It's funny. It's like this gray and white gridded flannel. I almost feel like he made it for design walls because I think he did.
I think that. Yeah. I think that was the purpose. Yeah. Well,
at least it seems to be the purpose most people use it for, because I've seen it on so many design walls. So I'll try to find it and link to it so people can see what it is if you haven't seen it before, because it seems so perfect for that purpose.
And I've got a blog post about like a photo post on how I made mine.
Of how you made yours. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to link to your how-to as well. That's perfect. Yeah, because that's neat. I don't have a design wall, but I've always sort of been jealous of other people's. So that's cool. Well, Molli, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the While She Naps podcast. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I'm so glad we connected like all the way on the other side of the world. So this has been great.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Abby, and I'll sparkle at you later.
Okay. And you've been listening to the While She Naps podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Visit my blog, whileshenaps.com, where you can sign up for my email newsletter to get the best in sewing, blogging, and small business delivered right to your inbox each week. Today's episode was brought to you by Quilt Photography Co. Beautiful photos of your quilts are within reach. They've made it easy for you. Pick your package online, drop your quilt in the mail, then sit back and relax. Your quilt will be pampered and mailed back, and you can access your online gallery with the simple click of a button. Visit them at quiltphotography.com. Thank you so much, Quilt Photography Co. And if you enjoy the show, tell a friend about it. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.